When we get involved caring for people that can't care for themselves, we begin to know the heart of God, because God really cares about people who are physically poor. In Jeremiah 22, he writes, "He," talking about the king, "took up the cause of the poor and needy, and so it went well with him. Is this not what it means to know me?" asks the Lord. When we know God, we know his heart for the people who need help. This is the essence of who he is. He cares for the poor. Proverbs 22:9 says that the generous will themselves be blessed, for they share their food with the poor. God also wants us to share and to care about the spiritually poor. These are people who don't confess the name of Jesus, who don't know Jesus yet, who don't believe in him yet. The mission of Church on the Ridge is to share the love of Jesus with everyone in your world so that they can become fully devoted followers of Jesus. And this mission of Church on the Ridge goes hand in hand with Jesus' teaching. And the very last things he said before he left the earth to go be with his Father. And he said, "Go into all the world and teach them about me." Teach them everything I taught, so that they can become disciples of mine. They can become followers of mine. Because we know, and Romans 10 says this, that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. How then can they call on one in whom they have not believed? And how can they believe in the one in whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone to preach? And how can they preach unless they are sent? That sending is the giving so that the people can go and preach. We put resources and money into sending so that there can be preaching, so there can be hearing, so there can be believing, and so that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord has an opportunity to be saved. Your bank statement reveals what you care about. It reveals your heart. Do you put your money into what God cares about? My in-laws, Al and Helga Bonikowski, were missionaries in Spain, and this picture is from last year. It was the recentest one I had of them, and my kids weren't too excited that I was going to put this picture up here, but they approved it, so I've got approval from the children. Okay, so these are my in-laws, Al and Helga, and they were missionaries in Spain, and my husband, Stephen, has told this story many times about something they did when he was a boy that left a huge impression on him, and it really impacted his whole philosophy and attitude about money. A couple had come to them with a sob story, with a sad story. They'd lost all their money, and they needed to get from Idun, which is where my in-laws were, to Madrid. And they needed a loan to get there. And so they were asking for money. And my in-laws said, "Okay, we'll give you the money." And Stephen was like, he was just a boy at the time, and they were missionaries, and they didn't have a lot of extra money. And so he asked, "Well, Dad, what if they don't give it back?" And Al says, "It doesn't matter. I gave it to them as a gift, not a loan. And it's God's money. And if he wants to return it back to me, and they pay it back to us someday, fine." Stephen learned that our money is not actually our money. It's all God's. And we transfer trust off of money and onto God when we give it away. We simply manage what God has given us. Because Psalms 24:1 says, "The earth and everything in it is the Lord's. The world and all its people belong to him." Haggai 2 says, "The silver is mine, that gold is mine, declares the Lord Almighty." Everything is his. Vacations, clothes, food, cars, house, bank accounts, 401k, retirement funds. Now, God's provided all of this for us to enjoy. That's what 1 Timothy 6 says. He gives it to us to enjoy. But he doesn't give it to us to accumulate and hoard. There's joy in receiving and having, but there's more joy in sharing and giving. 2 Corinthians 9 says that you are enriched. You're made rich. You're made wealthy. You're given things in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion. The things you have are given to you so that you can be generous with it. And through us, your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. You have money so that you can become the through person. You have possessions, you have things, so you can be the through person, the one who passes God's riches on to others. I want you to imagine if you wanted to send a blanket to someone. So you pack it up in a box, and you take it up to the UPS store, and you set it on the counter, and you send it off. But after a few weeks pass, you hear that blanket never arrived, and you're like, I wonder what happened. So you trot back up to the UPS store, and you poke around a bit, and you look in the back, and you see that delivery guy is wrapped up, snuggling in your blanket. What are you doing? Why did you keep my blanket? And the guy answers, well, if you didn't want me to keep it, why'd you give it to me in the first place? Huh? You don't understand your job. That blanket wasn't for you. You're just the middle guy. You're the middleman. You're the delivery guy. I was counting on you to get that where I needed it to go. How many times do we confuse our job and we keep the gift that was meant for us to pass along? We neglect to make God's delivery. Maybe you're thinking, I don't have wealth. I'm not really rich. I'm really struggling to make ends meet. What if I haven't been given a lot? I think Jesus would ask you, what do you have? When Jesus was teaching to a crowd of over 5,000 people, at the end of the day, the disciples started freaking out. They started to get worried because nobody had bread and this crowd was going to go hungry. And so they come to Jesus and they're like, Jesus, nobody has bread. They're hungry. What are we going to do? And Jesus says, you give them something to eat. And the disciples are like, well, that would take more than a half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread just to give them something to eat? And Jesus says, all right, well, how many loaves do you have? Go find out. And so they go and find out and discover 5 little loaves. Bring it back to Jesus, and what does he do to them? He multiplies them to meet the need. Thank you, Millie. Go and see what you do have, Jesus says. Because Jesus will take what you have, little as it is, little 5 loaves, and he will multiply it to meet the need. My parents were also missionaries. This is Hank and Ruth Skeltema. They were missionaries in the Amazon, and my dad flew float planes to cut the time it took to travel along the winding Amazon River. He could hit 3 preaching points in a day. That would normally take someone a week to get there. He saved lives by making emergency medical flights, and he aided the missionaries who lived back in the jungle. He needed a plane that could handle the rigors of the rainforest. But how could he preach to those people in remote places unless he could physically get to them? And how could he physically get to them without an airplane? And how could he get an airplane unless he had $20,000? Because that's how much a Cessna 185 on floats cost in 1964. It's $200,000 in today's money. How? And then my dad remembered the words of Jesus. What do you have? And my dad had the people of God. He had many supporting churches around the country who were supporters of his ministry and patrons of the gospel of Jesus. They cared about the spiritually poor like God does. So my dad divided up the plane into 100 different projects that people could give to, and he called it Amazon Airlift. And he invited people in the churches to purchase the wing, or buy the spark plugs, or get the handles for the door, or buy the propeller. At that time, S&H green stamps were things that people were collecting, I don't even know what they used it for, I'll be honest. They were like food stamps. Anyways, and so they would have these S&H green stamps, and Dad says, hey, we'll take those. What do you have? And he said, 12 books of stamps will buy the airplane battery. $15 will buy the compass. And anyone who gives $5,000 is offered a free trip with me to the Amazon. And I was just there in August, and it's a great trip. Didn't do it for $5,000 though. This is what Olive Crest is doing. They are dividing up the project into things and asking you, what do you have? What can you give? This is the mission of Church on the Ridge. We share the love of Jesus with everyone. We want to reach everyone, but we start with what we do have and who we can talk to. Who is God in front of us, right? Who has God put right in front of us right now to talk to? What do you have? Go and see how you can give and watch Jesus multiply to meet the needs, because the cumulative effect of the Church of God will meet the need. At the dedication of the plane, which took place, that's the top picture, and the bottom picture is in the Amazon. It took place on a lake in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and all the people who had given to the plane were invited, and a dad came up and said, my son gave all his savings for a bicycle to go towards this airplane project. And a group walked by, and they were like, look at that propeller. That's what our middle school youth group raised money for. And the people of God put their treasure into that plane to share the good news of Jesus with people that they were never going to meet this side of heaven. And their heart followed. In the 80s, when I was a kid, we still had people coming up and saying, oh, those are the seats we helped fund. Those are the pedals that we gave towards. And that airplane was still in use, spreading the good news of Jesus up until 10 years ago when it finally got sold to another group that is using it. One girl at the dedication gave her life as a missionary when she grew up to Papua New Guinea because her heart followed that little contribution that she gave to the plane. The amount we give is not the point. It's how we view what we do have. Do you understand that you are a manager of what God has given to you? Or are you like that delivery guy, keeping warm underneath the blanket, intended for somebody else? Are you confused about what your job is? There's a parable found in Luke 12, and it's about a guy, a farmer. So I asked ChatGPT to modernize it for us, okay? So this is what ChatGPT spit out. The portfolio of a certain wealthy investor yielded an extraordinary return. As he reviewed his profits, he thought to himself, what shall I do since my current investments have grown so large and I have no room to allocate all my profits? Now, if you're a financial guy or gal or an investor, that sentence really made no sense, but we're just going to go with it, okay? All right, so then he said, well, this is what I'll do. I'll sell off all my smaller investments and consolidate my portfolio. I'll put my wealth into the biggest, highest-yielding stocks and create a legacy fund, securing my wealth for decades to come. And he thought to himself, well, once I do this, I'll have financial security for many years. I'll be able to take it easy, enjoying the good life. I'll eat, drink, and be merry, knowing that my future is safe. But that night, God said to him, you fool, this very night, your life will be required of you. Then who will inherit all that you've accumulated? This is how it will be for anyone who stores up wealth for themselves, but is not rich towards God. Randy Alcorn, who's a popular writer on finances and giving, says this: you can't take it with you, but you can send it on ahead. You can save for your eternal future. Jesus teaches, do not store up for yourselves treasures here on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. And another place, he says, give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. He says in another place, provide. Do you know that 40% of Jesus' parables were about money and possessions? It's because that's where our hearts are at. And he wants our hearts to be God's. Anyways, okay. Part of that 2,300 things that I wasn't going to talk about. Another place, he's in 1 Timothy 6, Paul is talking to Timothy, and he says, tell the wealthy to use their money to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, when they are generous and willing to share, in this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age. When we take our earthly money and we give it to the poor, the physical poor, the spiritual poor, that's how we save up and store our money for our future lives in God's kingdom. Imagine a man died and went to heaven, and he's standing at the pearly gates, and this man believed in Jesus. He had trusted in him. He believed he is who he said he is. He gave his life to him, made him the boss of his life, showed up at the pearly gates, and Peter is there to let him in. Why is Peter always at the gates? Do you guys know why that is? There's a verse in the New Testament where Jesus says he's giving the keys of heaven to Peter, so that's why we kind of always put him there in the jokes. All right, so Peter's there, and he's like, welcome, welcome, faithful servant, and the guy comes in, and Peter starts walking along the golden streets of heaven, and they're looking at mansion after mansion, and oh, that's a beautiful estate, and another beautiful estate. And they get to the end of the road, and Peter stops in front of this shack and kind of motions to the guy, and the guy's like, wait a minute, I think I'd be more comfortable in one of those mansions. Why do I just get a hut? And Peter shrugs and says, well, we did the best with the money you sent us. Now, we don't know if it's going to go into houses. That's just kind of a funny way to look at it. We don't know what the treasure is actually going to look like in heaven, but we're told it's there. We are citizens of God's country. And I think many times we get confused that God's country, God's kingdom, heaven, is like clouds with singing and harps all the time. It sounds kind of boring. But Jesus tells us he's going to make a new earth and a new heaven. And this earth isn't going to be corrupted by all the broken things and all the wicked people and all the corruption. It's going to be a great place to be. There is more to living this life, and we can send treasure on ahead.